The black sedan stopped before the towering glass headquarters on a billion-dollar morning. Clara Bennett, a ruthless CEO, stepped out, never looking back. Lucas, her quiet driver, held the door. He had an ink smudge on his thumb from his son's homework. A young executive whispered loudly, "He's just the driver. He's furniture." Clara smirked. "He just drives. That's all he's paid for." Lucas didn't react. 45 minutes later, the boardroom was a war zone. A mistranslated phrase killed the deal. Clara looked at her useless interpreters in panic. Then the door opened. The driver walked in, and he spoke fluently in their native language. His name was Lucas Moran, 46 years old, with eyes that had seen more borders than most diplomats, and hands that gripped the steering wheel with a steady, calm assurance. He was a single father. His entire universe, the sun around which his weary life revolved, was his 12-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was currently at his bilingual school, probably struggling with his math homework in a classroom that cost more per semester than Lucas made in 3 months. Lucas checked his phone during the wait. A quick text to remind Ethan to eat his sandwich, not trade it for chips. Lucas wasn't a rich man. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment where the heating rattled like a dying engine in the winter, and he drove a 10-year-old Honda on the weekends. But he was rich in experience. Lucas wasn't just a driver. He was a logistics support specialist, a polite corporate term for the guy who drove the car, carried the heavy bags, fetched the dry cleaning, and kept his mouth shut. He was the man you ignored while you talked about confidential mergers in the back seat. But 14 years ago, Lucas Marin had been a different man. He had been a senior international logistics coordinator for a global shipping giant. He wasn't just a participant, he was a shark. He had lived in Hamburg managing freight to Shanghai during the port strikes. He had lived in Sao Paulo, negotiating complex customs treaties with government officials who didn't want to sign. He had lived in Tokyo, overseeing port operations during a typhoon. He didn't learn languages from an app with a green owl. He didn't learn them in a comfortable classroom with a textbook. He learned German by arguing with dock workers in the freezing rain at 3 a.m. He learned Mandarin by negotiating fuel prices in smoky offices in Shenzhen. He learned Portuguese by sharing meals with truck drivers in the favelas. He spoke 3 languages fluently, English, Spanish, German, and could hold his own in 3 others, Mandarin, French, and Japanese. He knew the difference between a textbook word and a street word. He knew that in business, what you say matters less than how you say it. But life had taken a sharp, brutal turn. His wife's sudden illness, a rare, aggressive autoimmune disorder, had blindsided them. The medical bills drained their savings in 6 months. The treatments failed. Her passing had left him broken, hollowed out. The high-pressure world of international logistics required 80-hour weeks and constant travel. You lived in airports. You slept on planes. He couldn't do that to Ethan. Ethan had lost a mother. He couldn't lose his father to an airport terminal or a Zoom call. So Lucas stepped down. He resigned from a career that was on a trajectory to the C-suite. He took a job that required 0 travel and had fixed hours. He became a driver for Bennett Logistics. It was a humbling step down, a plummet from the stratosphere to the sidewalk. But it paid the bills, it offered health insurance, and it allowed him to be home every night to cook dinner and ask his son about his day. Clara Bennett was his boss. 41 years old, sharp as a razor, ambitious, and currently under the most immense pressure of her career. She was negotiating a $1 billion infrastructure contract to overhaul a major European port network. It was the kind of deal that would define her legacy or end her career. She had leveraged everything on this. Clara didn't know anything about Lucas. To her, he was part of the car. He was reliable, he was punctual, and he was silent. That was all she required. She didn't know he understood the frantic phone calls she made in the backseat in French. She didn't know he winced when she mispronounced the names of her foreign partners or used the wrong honorifics. On this morning, the tension in the car was palpable. Clara was on a conference call, her voice tight, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. "We need this deal," she snapped into her headset. "The Germans are hesitant about the timeline, and the Chinese investors are watching the liability clauses like hawks. If we slip up today, the stock crashes. I need everyone on their A game." Lucas watched her in the rearview mirror. He saw the fear behind her confidence. He saw the tremor in her hand. He wanted to say something, to offer a piece of advice about the specific cultural negotiation style of the delegation she was meeting. How the Germans valued precision over speed, how the Chinese valued relationship over contract. But he stopped himself. He was just the driver, and drivers don't give advice to CEOs. The car pulled up to the gleaming headquarters of the consortium. It was a fortress of steel and glass, designed to intimidate anyone who walked through its doors. Lucas put the car in park. He checked his tie in the mirror. He stepped out and opened the rear door for Clara. Clara stepped out, flanked by two young, aggressive junior executives, Mark and Sarah. They were carrying heavy briefcases and tablets, looking important, smelling of desperation and ambition. "Do we have the revised contracts?" Clara asked, striding toward the entrance, her heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement. "Yes, Miss Bennett," Mark said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "The translation team finished them at 2 a.m. They assured us everything is compliant." Clara nodded. She glanced back at the car. Lucas was standing by the door, waiting for instructions, his posture perfect. "Wait here, Lucas," Clara said dismissively. "This could take 5 hours. Or it could take 20 minutes if they walk out. Keep the engine running for the AC." Mark looked at Lucas and smirked. He leaned in to whisper to Sarah, but he was loud enough for Lucas to hear. It was a performance for his boss. "We really need a professional team today. I hope the translation is better than the coffee that guy gets us. He put too much milk in mine yesterday." Sarah giggled, covering her mouth. "He's just the driver, Mark. He doesn't even know what we're doing in there. He probably thinks we're buying lunch. Don't expect him to understand corporate strategy." Clara heard them. She didn't correct them. She gave a small, tight smile, validating their arrogance. "He drives safely," Clara said, her voice carrying. "That's his job. He steers the wheel. Leave the thinking to us. Let's go." Lucas stood perfectly still. His face was a mask. He had heard worse. He had been yelled at by captains of industry and port authority generals who controlled entire oceans. 2 kids in cheap suits didn't bother him, but he felt a twinge of worry. He had heard Clara practicing her opening remarks in the car. Her tone was aggressive. She was treating this like a hostile takeover, not a partnership. In the culture she was meeting today, aggression was seen as disrespect. Directness was seen as rudeness. "Good luck, Miss Bennett," Lucas said softly. Clara didn't answer. She walked through the revolving doors, her entourage trailing behind her like ducklings. Lucas leaned against the car. He pulled out a book, a novel in French by Camus. He waited. He watched the clouds reflect in the glass tower. Inside the building, in a massive boardroom on the 40th floor, the atmosphere was suffocating. The view of the city was spectacular, but no one was looking out the windows. The table was huge, made of polished mahogany that cost more than a house. On one side sat Clara and her team, tense and ready to fight. On the other side sat the delegation. There were representatives from Germany, China, and a Spanish logistics partner. They looked skeptical. The primary language of the meeting was English, the language of international business. But English is a tricky beast. It has sharp edges. The meeting started well enough. Pleasantries were exchanged. Coffee was poured. Hands were shaken. Then they got to Clause 14. Section B. The clause was about operational risk during the construction phase of the new terminal. It was the heart of the deal. Clara's lead lawyer, a man who had never left New York and thought the world revolved around Manhattan, began to read the terms. "In the event of supply chain disruption," the lawyer said, reading from the freshly printed document, "Bennett Logistics proposes a shared operational responsibility model to mitigate downturns." The interpreter, a young woman hired from an expensive agency, spoke into the microphones. She was nervous. She was translating word for word, not meaning for meaning. She translated shared operational responsibility into the German and Mandarin channels. But she used the wrong word. In German, she used a word that implied liability transfer, Haftungsübertragung. In Mandarin, she used a phrase that sounded like, "You take the blame," Tui shi ziren. The reaction was instant. It was visceral. The German representative, Herr Muller, A stern man with 40 years of experience and zero patience for incompetence slammed his pen down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The Chinese representative, Mr. Zhang, leaned back in his chair, his face turning to stone. He took off his glasses slowly, a sign of deep displeasure. "Excuse me?" Mueller said, his English heavily accented but clear. "You want to transfer the liability to us for your operational failures? We are partners, not your insurance policy." Clara frowned, confused. "No, that's not what we said. We said shared responsibility. We are in this together." "Your interpreter just said Haftungsübertragung," Mueller snapped, his face reddening. "That means we pay for your mistakes. That means if your trucks are late, we pay the fine. This is an insult. Do you think we are stupid?" Mr. Zhang spoke to his aide in rapid Mandarin. The aide looked at Clara, his face pale. "Mr. Zhang feels that Bennett Logistics is not acting in good faith. You are trying to trick us into signing a document that absolves you of duty. This is a betrayal of trust." "We are not trying to trick you," Clara said, her voice rising, losing her cool. "It's a standard clause. Everyone signs it. It is not standard to insult your partners." Mueller stood up. "If this is your attitude, there is no deal. We will find a partner who respects us." The room erupted. The interpreters were scrambling, flipping through dictionaries, trying to fix it. But they were digging the hole deeper. They were translating the anger, not the meaning. They were panicking. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. $1 billion was walking out the door because of a word. Her career was flashing before her eyes. "Wait," Clara yelled. "Let's take a recess. 10 minutes. Please, let us clarify." Mueller looked at his watch. 10 minutes. Then we go to the airport, and we will not be coming back." The delegation stormed out into the hallway, muttering in their native tongues. Clara slumped in her chair. Mark and Sarah looked terrified. The lead lawyer was staring at his papers, confused. "Fix this!" Clara hissed at the interpreters. "What did you say?" I used the standard dictionary term," the young translator stammered, tearing up. "It's the technical term in the manual." Outside in the hallway, Lucas was standing near the elevators. He had come up to bring a forgotten charging cable for Mark, who had texted him in a panic 5 minutes earlier because his laptop was dying. He saw the delegation walk out. He heard Mueller venting to his colleague in furious, rapid-fire German about American arrogance. He heard Mr. Zhang speaking quietly but angrily in Mandarin about loss of face and Western ignorance. Lucas understood every word. He understood the idioms. He understood the anger. He realized exactly what had happened. It wasn't just a wrong word. It was a wrong concept. They had used legalistic, adversarial terms when they should have used relational, cooperative terms. They had insulted the partner's honor by treating them like vendors instead of allies. Lucas stood there holding the charging cable. He could walk away. He could go back to the car. It wasn't his job. He was just the driver. He earned $20 an hour. This was a billion-dollar problem, but he looked at the closed boardroom door. He knew Clara was in there, watching her career burn down. He knew that if this deal failed, the company might downsize. He might lose his job. Ethan needed those braces. He sighed. He straightened his tie. He ran a hand through his hair. He walked past the security guard. Lucas approached Clara's assistant outside the door. "I need to speak to Miss Bennett." "She's in a crisis, Lucas," the assistant snapped, blocking his path. "She doesn't need the car. Go wait downstairs." "Tell her I know why they are angry," Lucas said calmly, "and tell her I can fix it. Tell her I know what Haftungsübertragung implies." The assistant hesitated. The words sounded authoritative coming from him. She opened the door. Clara looked up, her eyes wild, her hair slightly disheveled. "Lucas, what are you doing here? I don't have time for this. Did you bring the cable? Just leave it." "Ms. Bennett," Lucas said, stepping into the room. The air conditioning was freezing, but everyone was sweating. "I heard the partners in the hallway. Your interpreter used the word for liability transfer. They think you are trying to make them pay for your mistakes. They think you are shifting the blame before the project even starts." Clara looked at the interpreter. "Is that true?" It can be interpreted that way in a strict legal context, the interpreter squeaked. It's not about the dictionary, Lucas said, his voice firm, cutting through the panic. It's about the context. In Hamburg, you don't talk about liability first. You talk about joint venture stability. You talk about the foundation before the roof. In Shanghai, you don't talk about blame. You talk about harmonious risk. You talk about saving face together. You are speaking lawyer to them. You need to speak partner. Clara stared at him. For the first time, she really looked at him. She saw the intelligence in his eyes. She saw the man, not the uniform. You speak German? She asked, stunned. And Mandarin. In Spanish, Lucas said. I worked in logistics for 14 years before I started driving. I managed the Hamburg-Shanghai trade lane for Maersk. Clara looked at the clock. 5 minutes left. She had no other options. Her lawyers were useless. Her interpreters were broken. Can you talk to them? Clara asked. It was a desperate Hail Mary. I can try, Lucas said, but you have to let me do it my way. No lawyers, no scripts, just us. Clara nodded. Do it. Save this. The partners walked back in. They looked ready to leave. They were packing their bags. They were buttoning their jackets. Lucas didn't stand behind Clara. He stepped forward. He didn't look like a driver. He stood with the posture of a man who had commanded shipping floors and negotiated with unions. He turned to Herr Müller. Herr Müller, Lucas spoke in flawless, vernacular, Hamburg German. The accent was specific to the docks, gritty, authentic, and respectful. Entschuldigen Sie bitte, es gab ein Missverständnis in der Übersetzung. Wir sprechen hier nicht über Haftung. Wir sprechen über gemeinsame Last, wie zwei Kräne, die einen Container heben. Excuse me, there was a misunderstanding in translation. We are not talking about liability. We are talking about shared load. Like two cranes lifting one container. If one crane fails, the other holds the weight. That is the proposal. Muller froze. He looked at Lucas. You speak the Hamburg dialect? You sound like a dock foreman. I lived in Altona for 4 years, Lucas smiled. I know that a contract is only as good as the handshake behind it. And I know that in Hamburg, we don't sign until we trust. Muller's shoulders dropped an inch. The tension broke. A glimmer of recognition appeared in his eyes. Shared load. Gemeinsame Last. That makes more sense. That is a partnership. Lucas turned to Mr. Zhang. He switched effortlessly to Mandarin. Mr. Zhang, Lucas said, using the respectful honorifics and bowing slightly. The CEO apologizes for the bluntness of the text. Her intention was gong dan, sharing the burden together, not tui shi, pushing away responsibility. In her culture, directness is respect, but she understands that here, we must build the bridge before we walk on it. We wish to build a bridge that stands for 100 years. Mr. Zhang listened. He put his glasses back on. He looked at Lucas, then at Clara. She means to share the burden? Zhang asked in English. Yes, Lucas said, switching back to English for everyone. This clause isn't about who pays if things break. It's about a promise that if things break, we fix it together. 50-50, no finger pointing, no lawyers involved in the operations. Lucas looked at the Spanish partner, who had been quiet but confused. Es un esfuerzo conjunto, amigos, Lucas said in Spanish. Nadie se queda solo en la tormenta. It is a joint effort, friends. No one stands alone in the storm. The room was silent. Lucas didn't use big words. He didn't use indemnification or force majeure. He used metaphors. He used the language of the people who actually move the boxes, not the people who write the bills. He spoke human. Herr Müller sat down. He opened his folder again. Okay, if it is a shared load, we can discuss this. I like this concept. Mr. Zhang nodded. We can proceed. Clara sat there, stunned. Her driver had just done in 2 minutes what her $1 million legal team couldn't do in 2 months. He had turned enemies back into partners. The meeting went on for another 3 hours. Lucas stayed in the room. He didn't take over the negotiation. He didn't try to be the CEO. He stood by the whiteboard. Whenever things got stuck, whenever a word caused a frown, Clara would look at Lucas. Lucas would offer a synonym. He would offer a cultural context. He acted as the bridge. In Germany, be precise with the dates, he whispered to Clara. Don't say around May. Say May 1st. They need certainty. In dealing with Mr. Zhang, do not look at your watch, he advised. It implies his time is less valuable than yours. Sit back. Drink the tea. He guided her through the minefield. He was the navigator. She was the pilot. He prevented 3 more potential blow-ups just by reading the body language of the room. By 4 p.m., the deal was agreed in principle. Handshakes were exchanged. Real handshakes with eye contact and smiles. Herr Muller shook Lucas's hand on the way out. You should visit Hamburg again. The beer is still cold. You are a man who understands how the world works. I might do that, Lucas smiled. The room cleared out. It was just Clara, her stunned team, and Lucas. Mark and Sarah were staring at Lucas like he was an alien. Lucas checked his watch. 4:15 p.m. He was late for Ethan. Panic set in. He wasn't the negotiator anymore. He was the dad. I need to go, Lucas said, suddenly turning back into the employee. My son, the school, I'm late for pickup. Clara stood up. Lucas. He stopped. Where did you learn that? She asked. How? I worked in the industry for 14 years, Lucas said simply. I was a coordinator. I learned languages because I had to. If you don't speak the language, the cargo gets lost. If the cargo gets lost, people lose money. Why didn't you tell me? Clara asked. Why are you driving my car? You're overqualified for half the jobs in this building. Because my wife died, Lucas said. The room went quiet. The air grew heavy. And my son needed a father more than the world needed a logistics manager. I chose a job that let me go home. I chose a job that let me be there. Clara looked at him. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. She remembered her comment from the morning. He just drives. She remembered laughing at him. She realized she had been looking at a gold mine and treating it like dirt. She had judged him by his uniform, by his silence, by her own arrogance. She had been so focused on the billion-dollar deal that she missed the million-dollar asset holding the door for her. You're not just a driver, Clara whispered. Today I was, Lucas said, but I really have to go. Ethan waits by the gate. He gets anxious if I'm late. Go, Clara said. Take the car, the company car. Go get him. Do not take the Honda. A week later, the $1.5 billion contract was officially signed. It was the biggest win in the history of Bennett Logistics. The partners sent a formal email to Clara. In it, they didn't praise the lawyers. They didn't praise the price. They wrote, "We appreciate the clarity and respect shown in the final session. It is rare to find an American company that understands the nuance of our markets. The gentleman who assisted gave us confidence." Clara sat in her office, reading the email. She looked out the window. She thought about value. She thought about respect. She called HR. I want to offer Lucas Moran a new position, she said, head of international relations and cultural liaison. But he's a driver, the HR director said. Does he have a degree? He has something better, Clara said. He listens, and he speaks the language of trust. She called Lucas into her office. Lucas stood there in his uniform. He looked nervous. I want you out of the car, Clara said. Lucas looked worried. Am I fired? I know I overstepped. Promoted, Clara said. I need you in these meetings. I need you to train our teams on how to talk to people, not just how to bill them. I need you to bridge the gap. Lucas hesitated. My schedule, Ethan, I can't do the travel, Miss Bennett. Flexible, Clara said immediately. You work 9 to 3. You work from home when you need to. If you have a parent-teacher conference, you go. I don't care about the hours. I care about the results. And you got me the result. You set the rules. She pushed a contract across the desk. The salary was 4 times what he made as a driver. It was enough to fix the heating. Enough for college. Enough for a life. Enough to take Ethan to Hamburg one day. You don't have to be invisible anymore, Lucas, Clara said. Lucas looked at the contract. He thought about the years of being looked over, of being the guy holding the door. He thought about his wife and how proud she would be. He picked up the pen. I'll take it, he said, but I'm still driving my own car to work. It keeps me humble. Clara smiled. Deal. Lucas walked out of the office. He wasn't a hero. He wouldn't be on the cover of Forbes. But as he walked down the hall, the junior executives who had laughed at him, Mark and Sarah, nodded respectfully. They moved out of his way. They didn't see a janitor or a driver anymore. They saw the man who saved the company. He realized that his languages weren't just skills. They were bridges. And for the first time in a long time, he had crossed one back to himself. If you believe that understanding others is more powerful than proving yourself, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories of hidden genius. Tell us in the comments, have you ever seen a small misunderstanding almost destroy something big? How was it fixed?